What's up, guys? Welcome back to another content feature at Karma Marketing, where this month's theme is focusing on balancing well being and performance. So, with this month, we'll be focusing on redefining work culture. And what we really want to do is explore the synergy between healthy productivity and also holistic growth. So, really redefining productivity to include different kinds of elements such as balance, resilience, and purpose. And we also want to try to unlock new levels to really create or really highlight quote unquote sustainable success. So it's also a mix of having commitment to holistic growth, continuous learning, mentorship, and also self development. So I have a special guest today, and our main topic is discussing the connection between purpose and growth mindset. And I'll have her introduce herself. So, Megan, go ahead and say hello to the community.
Hi, community, and hi, Nina. I feel like I really enjoy all the conversations we've had so far, and this is just the next chapter of it. A little bit about myself. My name's Megan. I'm based in Singapore. Was born in Shanghai, but grew up here actually. And I currently lead programs at New Campus. So what we are is that we become this modern training outfit. Our goal really is to help scale people, teams, organizations. And where I come in is that I brought with me 6-7 years of experience in education. And for the past 2-3 years, we've actually been building out these learning experiences to help teams grow their leaders, their managers, but also ultimately to grow their own culture. Apart from my day job, leading programs, I'm also a ceramicist. So I also do have my own little urban potter practice called Eastfield Ceramics here in Singapore. We really focus on homeware that kind of blurs the line between functionality and art. So I'm pretty experimental when it comes to our stuff, but we also want to connect everything back to pieces of ceramics that can be used at home for food. I think it just gives me and my partner a good reason to, make things and plate them with delicious food. So that's one of the other things that I do. Outside of that, I think this month's focus is really about that balancing act. Just want to share a little bit about the other things that I balance. Right now, I'm on a 4-day work week at New Campus, so people always ask me what I do on the day off, and what I do is actually hang out with my grandparents. Last year, I managed to relocate them from Shanghai to here in Singapore to live closer to us, and so we can take care of them better. Yeah. So that's something that I spend, one day after we just hanging with them. There's not a lot of things that it does for me, so I think it opens up a lot of mental space. And then also conversations with them is always slightly unhinged.
I thought you were going to say full of wisdom, unhinged. I agree.
No, my grandparents just straight up unhinged. But no, as in, of course, there's wisdom, right? But there's also a certain amount of like serendipity, and it's nice because they were the ones that brought me here to Singapore, so it kind of feels a bit full circle. Yeah.
No, honestly, I appreciate that you introduce yourself outside of work as well, because I think that really highlights how fulfilling it is also outside of work, but also how it interlinks, the other aspects outside of work that will help you just be better overall in terms of work performance and also just sustainable performance.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. I was very intrigued since you mentioned New Campus is kind of all about leadership. And even in your ceramics job, talking about finding meaning or like finding a reason to kind of like do something. So let's start with the first question. And that is, how do you personally, or it could also be professionally, define purpose? Or how do you also define growth mindset? Among the two, you can start with either.
Yeah. I think it's a great question because like I do think the two are kind of tied with each other for me in particular. So earlier I mentioned that I actually started my career as a teacher in education. So I was in mainstream education in Singapore, was an art teacher at a senior high school. And I think the general way in which education is moving in Singapore is really about embracing that like love of learning, and this idea of a growth mindset is something that is so fundamental to people. So the reason why I left that life behind as well was I kind of started getting really curious about how people continue to grow after the school system. Then that's kind of how I ventured more into adult learning. But I remember actually one of the earliest conversations I had with new campers, and one of the questions was like, oh, what is your purpose? Like, what did I want to do? And I'm like, you know what, to be honest, I don't have a very clear statement.
It's also a
I
loaded
don't
question.
very loaded question, but I was like, I don't have a really clear statement. I don't want to like save the world or anything big and ambitious like that, right? But I do want to always constantly be slightly uncomfortable. Because I think that's a signal to myself that there is something in which I need to grow in, and that growth is a really uncomfortable process. So I think the purpose, it can sound quite selfish, but really I just want to move through life and constantly seek out spaces of discomfort where I can make good impact on other people, but also ultimately find ways to grow myself and shift my perspective, develop new skills, challenge my ways of thinking.
Yeah, a lot of people get intimidated by that question too, is because when you think about purpose, I feel like the first thing that people think is that what can you contribute to the world? And it's like it's kind of okay as well to just really talk within personal gains or like personal means to like find meaning within yourself. So I think that's one of the reasons why, when you come up with an answer to that question, it's not the easiest way to say like, I don't really want to do anything like to save the world or anything that's too much commitment, which is fine, like different means or like different purposes for different people.
For sure,
So
for
with
sure.
the connection of purpose and growth mindset, has this how long have you been reaping the benefits of finding this interconnectedness, and what kind of key insights have you gained while cultivating that balance of finding meaning and also cultivating growth mindset?
Yeah, yeah. I think like that's a good question because I feel like insights and learnings are the way in which you kind of measure how you have grown over time. One of the things you talked about is balance, and I think I want to just firstly say that I don't think balance is something that I necessarily do very well now, but I do think I'm doing it much better than I used to.
Yeah.
So I think if for anyone who's ever done education or been a teacher before, I'm sure they will resonate with this idea that as a teacher, like it's very difficult to balance things out. You're constantly overwhelmed by things that you are doing and can do and have to do for your students. So I feel like it's only much more recently that I've sought out much more balance in terms of like what I do, how I enrich myself, but also how like I carve out space to reset, to hang out with my unhinged grandparents, to just like clear the mental headspace a bit. I think one big insight through all of that process is that thinking about things internally is not the same as communicating them out loud to people. So I do feel like, sometimes it's all good. Like we cultivate a lot of like self-work and, we think a lot about the link between our purpose and, our growth mindset. But really the true way to like amplify that, both for myself as well for people around me, is really just to like open that space up and like talk to others about it. And that's kind of what I mean by there's only so much you can do just internally by yourself versus actually being able to talk to people and kind of to amplify that. So I think one big key insight is just finding out better ways to communicate that with people around me.
Yeah, interesting. In terms of communicating, then, is there a specific way that you do that? Or is it more of like finding people to kind of share your story and relate with other people who are on that same path or same story?
Yeah, I love the way you frame it. So I think there are two things, right? Like one is more of like medium, and then another one is more of community. So medium to me, like writing's always been quite a big part of like how I see myself or how I learn as well. When I first moved here from Shanghai, my English wasn't very good, so and that became a huge burden because I didn't even speak Mandarin Chinese. I only spoke my local dialect of Shanghainese at that time.
Oh,
And that was such a big hurdle. So, in terms of like learning subjects, like catching up in school, the big change really came about when I found like creative writing, and I through like English books. I would consume them. I would then start like writing my own stories or like writing out how I felt. So I would say like kind of that process of writing has followed me throughout. Even when I was teaching art, the part that I was most interested in was actually art criticism and writing. And I really feel like that's a great way to deal with things that are ambiguous. So I think one part of it is like writing. The other
yeah.
part of it you talked about is it more people related. I think a big shift also has been like moving away from, how I feel like nowadays in society, it's very normalized to talk about, oh, like I'm really busy, I'm really overwhelmed.
I
And
know.
I feel like, yeah, like hustle
I
culture is
catch
kind
myself.
of
I
created.
catch myself saying that too.
Me too, me too. And I think I did it so much, in education, sometimes it's just so much. So you just find yourself defaulting to that way of talking.
Mm,
And then I started realizing that, hey, if I could shift the conversation slightly, instead of talking about like I'm being really busy, or we're all really being really busy, and instead think about like questions, or like questions about things that are happening around me, and posing that to my immediate close group of friends, like it really changes the conversation itself.
yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah.
just because I think like in terms of like finding purpose, one of the best ways or one of the most effective ways that I find myself finding meaning or putting meaning into the things I do is genuinely asking questions. So it's like, oh, I'm so busy, or like, I've been busy doing this. But it's also just good to take some time or just ground yourself, even for just a minute, to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Or you like reflecting, oh yeah, over the last 2 hours I spent energy on like doing this, and then you ask yourself, was it worth it, or did I find any moments of fulfillment throughout that, because it also optimizes it, which is not meant to be a technical term. It's just kind of also setting your intentions with where you're putting your energy into your work or your craft.
Yeah, I think a big part of optimization is really just having some sort of optimistic energy, and
Exactly.
like going like, hey, even out of this range of things that we were doing and that we're grappling with, what is like the best part of it? What is the part that just like lights me up and feels really light and easy to do?
Yeah, and I also just want to add, like, it's good that you put out, the term of being optimistic, just because I recently listened to this podcast and it was just talking about defining happiness. And you know how a lot of people, I mean, I know like a lot of people have shifted their mindset where it's like, oh, it's not the destination, it's the journey. But like this guy was amazing because he was breaking down like what it meant to be on that journey, and like being
Mm.
optimistic slash being happy is three main things. So one is finding meaning in the things you're doing. Second is finding enjoyment. So, even though you're going through, I don't know, something that's super hard, or if you're going through hardships, can you find something to enjoy? Or like, is there something fun about it anyway, regardless of how hard it is? And then the last one is finding fulfillment. So I think it's great to have that mindset, like that optimistic mindset, because then you cultivate, finding meaning and then building that growth mindset.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really love that. One of our values at New Campus is actually enjoy the process. And I think that's a really easy value to like talk about, in peacetime.
I know.
When it's like, oh yeah, enjoy the process, of course, but I've also found that that's something that I constantly return back to, not just in work, but also actually very often now, like outside of work and the different things that I do. And it really like just sets things back into perspective, right? Where it's like, oh, even in the toughest moments, there is something quite enjoyable also about like working with people who are aligned, or like doing something new for the first time, or like
Yeah,
feeling yourself just sit in that zone of slight discomfort, but
yeah,
knowing that there is an endpoint somewhere.
yeah. I love that. So because we've been covering, finding meaning, finding purpose, I kind of want to focus more on growth mindset too, because personally,
Mm,
I find that there are three main characteristics just based on my journey as well, trying to build that continuous learning or building progress in what I do, my skills and capabilities. And, the three things you do to characterize growth mindset is number one, effort, learning, and also persistence to keep practicing whatever you're putting effort into. So I kind of want to ask you yourself, in terms of growth mindset, how would you define it, and how have you connected it with the way found your community, find your writing, or like building insights even?
I think that to me, the part that is maybe of most importance is also actually something that's incredibly boring. The least sexy part of it, which is really consistency. And I think what I mean by that, I'm just not just reflecting on like work when it comes to growth, but really like personal habits, like going to the gym, eating a bit healthy, spending time with family. I feel like what's worked most for me personally is really consistency. Like how regularly can I show up for something? I don't always have to show up like 100%. I think I used to think that, but actually I can show up like 2%, and at least I've shown up. And tomorrow I can do a little bit more. So maybe why I think this is important is also because I think growth mindset has definitely like shifted in terms of like importance and context for quite a long while. Like in education, the growth mindset is a really big thing that work with students on. But what I've also found is that because it's been talked about so often, it can also feel like something that's quite intimidating to people. To sit down and go like, I have a growth mindset feels like you need to be able to own that fully as an identity. But I don't think so. I think it's just really more about consistency than having to fully inhabit that all the time, every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be that person too, where it was like, no, I gotta be 100% every day, 100% today, 110% tomorrow, which was obviously not sustainable. And I recently came across this quote where it was like, if today you only have 2%, then that's basically 100%, because that's all you have for today. But technically, it's just, regularly showing up. And yeah, it is sometimes intimidating to kind of always sync progress, because I think people always associate it with productivity. Like, I can only have progress
Yes.
when I'm like super productive. But I think it's also just balancing out the restful periods and also the productive periods, which makes it long-term actual holistic growth.
Yeah. I really love that. And I think kind of connecting back to like when I first shared about like those days of my grandparents, it's something I talk about quite a lot about now. I really love the fact that you've picked it up as like productivity as a concept, or like what is productive. Because actually for me, like that empty space is incredibly productive. I think it helps me like think more. It helps me just like make sense of things. And so in art, there's this concept of like positive space and negative space. Like positive space is like what the central subject is. So like here is positive, right? And then your negative space is just like the emptiness around that people don't usually look at. And I really like that idea because in art also you're kind of looking for a balance of both. If your artwork is like 90% positive space, it's just too much going on. If it's a lot of if it's a lot of negative space, and it speaks a lot more towards like emptiness or like loneliness, but then you're always just trying to find that balance in between. And I think the second thing about it that's interesting is also thinking about negative space as having a shape itself. Because we usually think that, when you're not doing anything, it's just the leftovers. But I mean, if you look around me, the negative space is also clearly defined, and it has a shape. It has some sort of purpose. It has some sort of like a productivity to it as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a super interesting concept. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was like yin and yang. Now I'm creating a different. But yeah, like I agree with that. Like subconsciously, there has to be an existing. There has to be two different existing elements to kind of find that balance. Otherwise, when there's no balance, it's either just always going to be black and white, which is not the case. Like in reality, there always has to be a gray area. There always has to be a good space or a middle ground. So
for sure.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that concept. I will look into it after this interview. But let's go on to the last question then. So to our community, what piece of advice would you like to share, or what's something that you find most crucial that you can recommend to all the other people that's trying to find that connection or trying to cultivate both purpose and healthy growth mindset?
Yeah, I think something that's really important, and maybe this is like first and foremost a reminder to myself beyond just others, is that it's not like an all or nothing thing, and it's also perfectly natural to have long periods of time when you don't know what that looks like for yourself. And
Yeah,
it's perfectly okay, it's perfectly healthy. I think the only way in which you can truly like fail or not succeed is, um, to simply like not think about it anymore. But I do feel like there's always that case of like pursuing, so long as you're thinking about it and trying to find that, or like also being gentle and helpful to yourself in the process of it,
yeah.
that's sufficient. Yeah, I think that's a definitely a reminder to myself first.
It's a beautiful reminder. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope anyone that's listening right now to this segment to kind of keep that in mind as well. Always have a gentle reminder for yourself that either way, growth is still happening just because you're slowly putting effort into also manifesting it too. And yeah, definitely finding a balance is not easy, but it's also not impossible. So thank you, Megan, for coming on and sharing your own experience and wisdom. On to our next karma marketing feature for next month. But for now, everyone, peace and love, karma marketing.
Oh, balloons.